Welcome to the Prof G Pod's Office Hours. Today, you'll hear Best of Parenting. So with that, first question.
Hi, Scott. This is Jen calling from Toronto. I have a 12-year-old daughter, and this is the first year that she's had her own cell phone. And it seems that this is the year that, quote unquote, everyone in her class is on social media. She doesn't have social media yet and hasn't really expressed much of an interest. So I would love your thoughts on two things. One is, how would you recommend we introduce her to social media? And number two, what rules and monitoring would you put into place around her usage in the first couple of years?
Jen from Toronto, thanks so much for the question. And let me be clear, we have not figured this out. One of my sons developed device addiction. You'd think I'd be the last person that would let that happen because I rail on these companies. And yet we woke up one day and realized our son was really struggling, and it was because of device addiction. In addition, I think that both my kids are, especially one of them, is showing semi-addictive behavior to social media platforms. The research is clear. It's worse for you, quite frankly, because you have girls. Boys bully physically and verbally, girls bully relationally, and we have put these nuclear weapons in their hands called a smartphone. And once social went on mobile in 2012, the hospital admissions for self-cutting, self-harm, teen depression, teen suicide skyrocketed for girls and escalated dramatically for boys. So my first piece of advice is if your daughter is not asking for these things, my general advice is to keep them off of it as long as possible. And here's the hard part. When people say, well, okay, your kid's struggling from social media or depressed, that's your fault. They recommend the dosing. They recommend, well, it's about parental involvement. Anyone who says that doesn't have kids, because the most recent research, I believe it's from Jean Twenge and Jonathan Haidt, is there's something called the cohort effect. And that is, once everyone is on Snap, when you're the kid that's not on it, you, in fact, become very depressed because you are ostracized and you are isolated and sequestered from the rest of your peer group. So there's kind of no winning. And what Professor Haidt has advocated for, and I think is absolutely right, is to have schools ban phones up until a certain age. Now, assuming at some point she does enter the brave new world of smartphones and social, I can tell you what we do, and that is they are not allowed to take their phones into the room at night. There's been a lot of studies showing that a lot of kids, or the number of teens who are sleep deprived, has escalated because their phone is next to them, they hear it buzz, they pick it up, they start talking to their friends, and it goes downhill from there. Also, we try and limit the amount of screen time. We're not great at it. And also, and this sounds very 1984, and initially we didn't do it, but now we do it. We check their accounts and we check their content. I have wonderful boys that are really well behaved, and I've had already two incidences, one involving bullying and two around really ugly language that my kids were not directly involved in, but part of a circle. And I think it's especially bad for girls because, the notion, I don't think we can even imagine what it's like to be faced with your full self, to be presented with your full self 24/7. And then you have algorithms that encourage you to say outrageous things or that overly sexualize young girls, specifically Instagram. I mean, the deck is just so stacked against them. For me, what I try and do with my boys, because I think my boys have an easier time relating to me on certain things than they do their mother, I sit them down. I try and sit them down once a week. I'm like, what's going on with you? Are you doing okay? And what I try to communicate is that, look, if something bad happens online, this is the deal. I'm going to give you a bit of a hall pass on this stuff. And in exchange for that hall pass, you're going to come to me when something happens that upsets you. Because what you don't want, and where real tragedy strikes here, is that something bad happens online and the kids suffer in isolation and the parents don't even know about it. They don't even know about it. A kid gets bullied online, starts having suicidal ideation, goes down a rabbit hole at night, and the parents don't even know what is going on. Because if your kid develops an addiction to meth or alcohol or shoplifting, you find out about it. And that's the dangerous thing about these insidious devices, is that a lot of times the bullying, the mental health issues can pop up and get very bad very fast without you even knowing. So let me finish where I started. I know our household hasn't gotten this figured out. And congratulations. If she's not asking for it, I just don't think you're going to regret your 12-year-old daughter not having a smartphone or being on social. If she shows up a little bit late to it, I showed up a little bit late to alcohol and drugs. I enjoy both of those things, but I'm glad I didn't do any of those things until I was in college. And I think we're going to look back, and the one thing we're going to regret most about tech, big tech, is not that they weaponized our elections, not that they made our discourse more coarse, not that they created more income inequality, not that they abused the monopoly power. We're going to look back on this era and we're going to say, how did we let this happen to our kids? So, Jen, you are thinking the right way. I think you need to be all over this stuff. Appreciate the question. Best of luck to you and yours.
Question number 2.
Dear Prof G, this is Dr. C from Toronto, Canada and São Paulo, Brazil. I have just listened to your episode in which you explain why storytelling is the most underrated, yet perhaps the most important skill we should be teaching our children. I couldn't agree more. As a parent, on the other hand, I have been experiencing mostly the downside of storytelling, either in the form of honest incompetence, when there is subpar fact-checking or no fact-checking at all, or dishonesty in the form of misinformation. Given the downside of storytelling, I have 2 questions for you. First, what do you do as a parent so that your child can become a savvier consumer of stories? And second, as an educator, do you think universities should do more on how to become better consumers of stories?
This is a thoughtful question, Dr. C, that touches on a bunch of things. There's raising kids to be good storytellers, and then there's sort of this post-truth world that we're entering that's really, or have entered, that's really unfortunate. As it relates to raising storytellers, good storytellers, I remember thinking, I do so much virtue signaling on this program, and I pretend to be such a better father than I actually am. And I've been talking about how important storytelling is for a while. And I'm like, well, okay, boss, what are you actually doing about it to try and help your kids be better storytellers? So I've been doing, dumb things like at dinner when, my 12-year-old won't, be quiet, but my 15-year-old won't say anything. I task the 15-year-old with starting a conversation. What I'm going to start doing, I haven't done it yet, is to actually come up with stories. I started by telling them stories of their grandparents, how they met, immigrating from Britain, moving to Canada, their drive across the U.S. in an Austin mini metro when my mom was 7 months pregnant. And they're enthralled by it. And I think that them hearing stories, I hope, gets them to be better storytellers. The schools, I'll give it to them, are trying to pull that out of them. My son went to this wonderful school, or my son's called Gulfstream, and their 8th grade, every 8th grader has to stand up in front of the entire community of the school, including the parents, and do a 10 or 15-minute talk. And my son did his talk on whaling and the whaling industry in Nantucket. And it's great. And he thinks about it, and he has to do it with slides, and he's nervous about it, and it's hard for a 13-year-old to stand up in front of people. The only competence I have is communications, right? I know how to communicate. I know how to write. I know how to put together slides. I know how to a good twist of phrase, right? And that is how I've made my living. And I immediately recognize with younger people, they have to be able to be good storytellers if they want them to be a business and consulting. If you're really amazing with technology, but you can't spin a story, that's the COO or the CTO max. You can be less good and a great storyteller, and you call that woman CEO. The ability to communicate your ideas and attract capital, human and financial, is the whole shooting match. How do you get people to be good storytellers? 1 is practice. 2 is different mediums. I would start with the written word. I think if you can express your thoughts cogently by writing them out, the other stuff's going to get much easier. And then just practice, and specifically a lot of confidence and trial and error around speaking in front of people. And I'm credited with being a good communicator and a good speaker. I get paid a lot of money to speak, and I have panic attacks. Sometimes I get so fucking nervous and I freak out and I get on stage and I start talking and I start gasping and swallowing air, and I feel as if I'm dying, and the whole audience freaks out because I look like I'm in the midst of a heart attack. And so if you're nervous in front of people, if you think I can just never do it and I need to avoid it, think again. Think again. This is how I make my living, and I get panic attacks. And you have to get over it. You have to figure it out. I'm not suggesting you're going to be Tony Robbins, right? I'm not suggesting you're going to be Maya Angelou, but you got to have a certain minimum acceptable presentation skills. It's painful, take classes, go to Toastmasters, whatever you need to do. I am trying to figure out a way to put my kids in context where they get more of that, more experience at that, creative writing, etc. The second part of your question, I'm really worried about a post-truth world. The biggest fear I have about generative AI is I would say, okay, give me 10 tweets about how vaccines alter your DNA that sound real and like they came from a medical established agency or a medical think tank. And it'll produce 10 tweets that are false, but sound kind of real. And veracity has really become a function of who is the loudest and who has the biggest following, right? If Donald Trump says a lie long enough, it starts to become less of a lie. What do we do about that? I don't know. Invest in organizations that have fact-checking, whether it's the Wall Street Journal or PBS or the BBC or, love them or hate them, the Post and the New York Times, they have a viewpoint, but they do take fact-checking very seriously. Don't advertise on Fox News. That should be called Fox Entertainment, where the anchors coordinate to spread information and lies that they know are lies because they think it'll inflame their audience and sell more hearing aids. I mean, that bullshit that's mendacious. That's an abuse of your position and society. What else can we do? Remove Section 230 or have carve-outs such that these social media algorithms, if they are circulating lies that result in teen depression or misuse of medical treatment or a belief that an election is rigged when they know it's not rigged, they should have the same type of liability they have out now with the carve-out around sex trafficking. If you put information on Facebook that results in the trafficking of a minor, Meta is liable. And guess what? It reduced it a lot. So do we want to reduce election misinformation, vaccine misinformation, medical information, data or content that gives kids suicidal ideation? Oh, no, it'd be too complex. No, you could do it. They could absolutely do it. Just give them financial incentive to do it. In sum, I haven't figured this out, but I recognize the importance. I'm trying to do some things that help my kids develop those skills. Some of them are comfortable. I don't have definitive answers. I just know if we want to appreciate the truth, we have to appreciate the truth and reward those that aren't fact-checking and punish those that believe they can turn a lie into the truth by just telling it over and over. Thanks for the question. Dr. C from Toronto, the friendly, clean Canada. Go Leafs! Go Leafs! That's all for this episode. If you'd like to submit a question, please email a voice recording to officehours@profgmedia.com. Again, that's officehours@profgmedia.com.